Even getting to the feast was challenging in those years.
Our first feast was in '54 in Texas. And we went by train, and of course, you didn't have a car.
Many people coming to the feast were still recovering from the Depression years and rarely traveled.
It was the first time I'd ever been out of the state of Oregon.
Because of understanding the feast, we were blessed to be able to travel at a time when many people in the country didn't travel that much.
It was a long trip from Pennsylvania. It was 4.5 days going on back roads all the way, no interstates.
We had all of our stuff in the trunk of the car, and Ray had tied it down, and he said, "Don't anybody ask for anything out of that trunk till we get to Texas." We didn't.
My husband used to say, we traveled in a car that I wouldn't drive to Longview in now.
Right. I'd had to get another old car, and we blew 3 tires and lost a radiator on the way to Big Sandy. So, you know, it was an exciting time. You had to do a lot of travel, a lot of going forward on faith and confidence. Well, it'll just work out. We never worried about it. We never thought anything about it. This is what you do.
These people came to the feast on faith, really. We all did, not knowing where we were going or how we were going to get there and back, but we did it.
My husband was accepted to Ambassador College, and we went in July. And after classes started, he was informed that all the students would be going to Texas for a camp meeting, he told me. It was a camp meeting. Oh, I was to go along? Yes, we were all to go along.
I knew about the feast when I went to college, but I didn't understand what it was all about. I understood the Sabbath, but not necessarily. And so our experience was we have the students in college who, 3 weeks after they're in college, we're going to Texas to the feast. How do we do this? And so we pulled our resources, and I'm sure we had some help. I don't remember that. But we came to Big Sandy, to Gladewater, to the feast.
Some stayed in motels, and others camped.
I remember I was embarrassed at the particular time of putting up my tent because I'd never put up a tent before, and I had the thing upside down, and the lady at the campsite next to me explained to me, "I think it'll work better if you turn it over." So I turned the tent over and actually got it. My wife and I were able to get it up.
Well, the hardest part is I'd never camped before. And we had no money for even paper plates, so we carried our china. So we'd cook over a little camp stove and then wash our dishes and bring the 1 bucket of water.
Which carried up from the spring.
1 bucket of water, and Les would say, "But what did you do with the water I bought you earlier?" That was, the part of my troubles there. No, but it was a good time. It was a fun time because everyone was out there in their campfires, and, we all sat around, and people brought trailers full of canned goods. They didn't go to the grocery store to buy their goods. So it was a good time. I have no complaints, except it was hot, it was dirty, and it was hard.
When we arrived, they assigned us a place for our 9-foot by 9-foot pyramid tent for all 5 of us. And there was several inches of powder. Some people call it sand, but it seemed like it was powder. And our daughter, who just had beautiful curly hair, enjoyed throwing that dust on her head. Her mother got exasperated and said, "Well, I'm never going to come here again." And then a few years later, about 10 years later, we lived here. Anyway, things were very primitive then.
In spite of having primitive conditions, feastgoers still had an enjoyable time.
The good times were wonderful because our friends were there. You could go down almost any street in the Piney Woods and people were offering you food, and as a teenager, of course, that was awesome to be able to have food all the time. Anybody, almost any place you went, people would offer you food.
And you had a lot of this country music going on in the around the campfires, and that was such a pleasure to be among these people.
Some campers tried something new.
These metal booths out here were originally built because we had so many people attending the feast that there was no housing available in the local area. And so Mr. Armstrong got the idea of having these small metal buildings built.
One of those early years, my parents had actually purchased one of the booths. My dad tells a story about Booth City actually began as a location for people to buy temporary dwellings for the Feast of Tabernacles. And so my family bought one. I remember camping in that. I guess you could call it camping. It was just a metal shell, but we would cook out in front of the booth, and I remember having meals there.
Feastgoers also remember why they were there.
I've got film footage that can be shown, showing Mr. Armstrong preaching right there at the Redwood building, behind the beautiful podium and the beautiful redwood paneling behind him. And I think it was probably on the last great day, Mr. Armstrong was at the podium, and I mean, he used all the gestures and, you know, as he was prone to do. Obviously, in those days, we were so hungering and thirsting for truth because everything we heard was basically new.
We'd never heard the story before, so it was so exciting to hear and learn and to look forward to, you know, the resurrection of family members and so forth. So it was just so exciting because we didn't have a local church back in Pennsylvania at the time.
And everybody was just sitting on the edge of their seat to grasp more and to get more, all of the understanding they could possibly get from Mr. Armstrong.
But I really thought going to the Feast of Tabernacles to learn, that's so important. You just have an open and receptive mind, just knowing, here I am, God, teach me.
Attendees spent much of the feast in services.
Many times, not only did we have the morning service, the afternoon service, but then we'd have an evening service. So we were having up to 3 meetings a day, and they were full meetings.
And all the services were held in the Redwood building, long services, till 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and so on.
17 services, we had 17 sermons at least during the feast, so it really filled us.
But that was all new to me. I was like a sponge. I really soaked it up.
Our very first feast was in 1963. I was 11 years old. We'd only been to the church a few months, didn't have enough money to go for the whole time, so we went for a weekend. We got in about 3 days for the feast in Big Sandy, and we were amazed at everything. But one thing that I remember from 46 years ago was that we met a family there who'd come all the way from Canada. That just boggles your mind. You know, people who won't drive 5 miles to go to church in town. And these people had driven all the way from Canada. The holy days were new, but it was people keeping them this way that told us there is something more to this. Somebody has wrapped their minds around something that they say, this is really big. This is important to our future. And we began to learn what it was that was so big, what it was that was so important.
Others saw the important meaning behind the feast as well, and the growth became a major challenge to Mr. Armstrong and the church.
And I remember him saying so well there from the podium, he said, we are outgrowing this facility here. He said, I don't know where we're going to put them except we put a balcony all the way around, and maybe that'll hold the growth. Well, we outgrew that the very next year before the balcony could ever be built. Well, then the idea came on for Buck's Bowl. Now, a lot of people have not heard what Buck's Bowl is all about, but Buck's Bowl was a kind of a sunken, kind of a natural amphitheater right there on some of the property that Buck Hammer had donated to the church. So Buck's Bowl was to hold us until the kingdom came. It was to hold about 25,000. Well, by the 60s, with Big Sandy, Squaw Valley, Jekyll Island, with those combined attendances, we were already surpassing what Buck's Bowl would have ever done.